Hey everyone, it's Marcus and Matt from the Expat Edge, and this is the second episode of our podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about bilateral visa waiver agreements, whatever those are, and the ease or opportunities of traveling around Europe.
Welcome to the Expat Edge with Marcus and Matt, where we answer your questions about becoming an expat to help you thrive abroad.
Now, I just came across this topic, Matt. You and I talked about it a little bit more in detail. I did a bunch of research what bilateral agreements are, and it turns out that nowadays the Schengen zone has 27 countries, and before that was formed in 1985, and over the years more and more EU countries have joined the Schengen. Before that, there were a number of individual agreements with various countries that allowed people or tourists to stay in, let's say, France or Czech Republic, wherever. So as an American, you could go to France for 90 days before the Schengen. And so it turns out that these bilateral agreements are still, or many of them are still in force. And you can couple them with the Schengen time that you have, the 90 days out of a 180-day period, and the number of days according to the bilateral agreement. So let's kind of look at some real life examples.
Sure. Well, so you've created this nice handy tool, Marcus, which we'll put in the description below. But, as soon as you get to the page, you just select your citizenship. Since Marcus and I are both Americans, let's choose that first. We'll walk through that. But as you can see, every country's in here. So you just select your citizenship and click show all countries I can visit visa free. And then it comes up with a short list of the countries that have bilateral visa waiver agreements that are currently in force between the US and these various European countries. One thing I just want to point out in the very beginning, so, we've been talking about this now for a couple of weeks. If you're going to Europe and your plan is to stay there for an extended period of time, months, you should plan in advance where you're at least going to start the trip. Because one thing about this list, you could theoretically start in Belgium, go to Denmark, Spain, France, Italy, Latvia, Hungary, Netherlands, Portugal, Norway, spending the maximum time in each country. But at the end of that, you could not go to another Schengen country not on this list. Actually, you couldn't go to any countries that are on this list because you will have exhausted the time. But in any case, if you're going to go to the European Union in the Schengen area specifically for an extended period of time, you want to make sure that you're going to start your journey in one of the countries that's not on this list if you want to visit it. Because if you go to Czech Republic or Germany, let's use Germany as an example. You go to Germany, you spend 90 days there. Well, you've used up your Schengen time, so you can't go to any other Schengen country unless they have a bilateral visa waiver agreement with the US, and these 10 countries do. Whereas if you went to France first, you would use up the bilateral visa waiver agreement time, and you would use up your Schengen time. So you couldn't then go to Germany because your Schengen time has been used up. That's one of the maybe downsides to this list, is that all of these countries are in the Schengen zone as well. So, I guess that makes sense. That's why we're comparing them. But if you were to leave the Schengen zone going to Serbia, for example, then that could reset your Schengen time.
Right. So there's different strategies that you can take if you're one of those kinds of digital nomads or expats or maybe early retirees, and you're looking for a way to extend your time in Europe. You could use these various bilateral agreements with these types of countries. You could extend your trip by quite a few months by hopping around from country to country.
Well, you always could extend your trip relatively easily in Europe by going from Czech Republic to Serbia. Then you could go to Germany and then go back to Serbia and then go, but again, it always involved spending time in a non-Schengen country. Whereas this provides, the opportunity to stay all in the Schengen area if you're willing to do 4 countries throughout the year. But then after you exhaust this list, you still have to leave the Schengen area for 90 days before you can re-enter any of these countries.
Yeah, and for comparison's sake, some of the non-Schengen countries, Albania, let's see, Andorra. Although there are countries in Europe that, you know, they don't have. Let's say one example is Monaco. Like France, you know, controls that border, so there's essentially no border, and there's no way to prove that you were in Monaco or some of these countries. But certainly if there's a stamp in your passport when going across the border, so you could, you know, fly to Serbia, you could go to Albania, Cyprus, the UK, that's a popular one, Romania, Turkey, like there's one on here, Vatican City, right? There's nowhere to even stay, as I understand. So
yes, but I was just going to say we should talk about the borders.
Right. If you're using these bilateral agreements to your advantage and the borders are open, you essentially, when you're leaving the Schengen area, you essentially have to prove to the border guard, you know, he'll see your stamp. You came into Germany last year, 12 months ago. And now you're leaving Italy, you know, a year later. And he's like, what's going on here? You know, you only have 90 days in the Schengen. The burden is on you to prove that you were in each of these countries for, you know, no longer than the maximum allowed time. So whether that's some kind of, I don't know, stamp or hotel reservation or receipts, you know, that's the downside, is you kind of have to make your case for the border control officer.
Right. And so if you spend 90 days, let's go a little bit further into the border issue, because I think we should discuss this. If you spend 90 days in Croatia and then you move to Italy, the border, you know, you can easily just cross back into Croatia. But under the bilateral visa waiver agreements, you cannot leave that country once you're there, unless you're leaving for another one on the list if you've already used all of your Schengen time up. So that's an important point to remember, that yes, Europe is open and you can cross all the borders, but the burden will be on you when you go to leave the Schengen area with 12 months having been spent potentially, let's say you're in Croatia for 90 days, Belgium for 90 days, Spain for 90 days, France 90 days, and then you go to Italy for 90 days and you go to leave. They're going to be like, what in the heck? And the burden, like Marcus said, is going to be on you to show that not only did you only go to those countries that had the bilateral visa waivers, but that you also didn't cross borders internally after your 90 days initially was used up. So that can be quite difficult to probably prove. But we saw a number of real world accounts of this on Reddit and in digital nomad forums that people are definitely using this to their advantage. But you just need to be aware, that you should have some sort of records.
What essentially, there's not a ton of information online about this, and that's why I kind of got into it and started researching it. But some of the people who really want to extend their time in Europe in the Schengen zone, what they're doing is, they're documenting their stay in some way, and then also they're reaching out to the consulate of that country or the embassies and saying, this is what I'm planning to do. I just want to make sure that, it's okay according to the bilateral agreement. Like, what can I show the border control officer at the border to prove that I stayed, no more than 90 days in France, whatever it was. And there were some people who there was a few people who sent emails to each of the consulates of these countries and got a written response saying, yes, it's valid agreement. Yes, it's a valid agreement. There was one that said, a consulate from France said, it's a valid agreement, but at the discretion of the border control officer.
Well, but that's always the case.
Right. And so if you have your well-documented stay in these countries, then you can make a good case. You should be fine at the border. And, these are bilateral agreements that are available to, right. You could even pull them up and show them at the border. So I think some people may not want to do it just because then you have to document everything. But if you really are planning on a long-term trip in Europe, you could you could leverage these agreements.
Right. No, I mean, it's certainly something that I never knew about. And like I said, I've gotten many comments and questions about it all the time. One real world example, somebody wrote to me and said, I want to be in Poland, but I want to stay within the EU. I don't want to go between Poland and, Serbia, for example. Where can I go? I was like, well, when I was answering, I said, as far as I know, it's not going to be easy to do. And then my brother recently, he's in Croatia and needs to move to Italy, and he was worried because he had a residence permit in Croatia, but actually when the residence permit expires, your Schengen time doesn't start. Your Schengen time has been exhausted by the last 90 days of the residence permit. So he could only go to one of the countries with a bilateral visa waiver agreement.
Yeah. So take a look at these lists. Now let's look at a different passport holder, because I was surprised that a lot, even like countries in South America, those, like, let's say Uruguay or Honduras or something. Can you pull one of those up?
Okay, Honduras. I'd be very surprised
but
if they have.
I think
agreements.
they have some countries. So you don't have to be an American to take advantage of these. And they have some that Americans don't, like Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein. So it's very interesting. Like if you're not a U.S. citizen, check this list out, and you may be surprised that that you can visit some of these countries visa free for more than the time that you had initially thought in the Schengen.
I want to see this. Visa free travel for Honduran passport holders. Yeah, Switzerland's in the list.
I was surprised at some of those countries. I mean, you pull up something like Armenia. So Armenia has no visa free options in the Schengen.
So Ukraine has Latvia, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Very interesting. You said Armenia.
Yeah, Armenia has 0.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about Chinese? Because that would be surprising, because I didn't know China could go anywhere in
My
Europe
guess
without
is
a visa.
no, but
Well, it looks like we broke your app.
let me try on my end. China.
Okay, so China just froze it up.
China has nothing.
Went back.
Oh,
Let's try again.
yeah.
Nothing. What about Kenya?
What about
Try
India?
Yeah. So Kenya has nothing as
Can
well.
Indians go to?
Oh, India.
Okay, yeah. So
None. Yeah.
you'll have to look and see if
Belarus. None. Yeah, wow, that's some of these are, like I said, Ukraine was quite surprising. They had Switzerland.
Israel has quite a few.
So,
Actually,
well, that makes
Right.
that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, I think that a lot of people don't know about these bilateral agreements, that they can extend your stay in Europe, and you can leverage them if they fit your trip. You could certainly just go down the coast. If you're an American, for example, you could go Netherlands, Belgium, France, Spain, Portugal, and just spend your time in those countries, and that's over a year, for example. So it's quite interesting. I don't have to necessarily prove this because I have a German passport, but next time you're in Europe, Matt, you can put it to the test.
Yes. I don't know if the next time I'll be in Europe for over 90 days. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but yeah. No, this is seriously interesting. I mean, actually, it's funny. We're going to talk now about, the ease of travel in Europe, and it's a great kind of segue into that. But also, we came to this was because we were advising people on traveling around Europe. And it's interesting, really, if you ask anybody about this, nobody has any idea. Even people who are seasoned travelers or people who've lived significant time in Europe, in these countries, as Americans, they don't even know these rules. So it's really quite a novel topic to be talking about.
So I saw this list here, the ETIAS list. Basically, it states it right on their website. This is what you would need to fill out, the ESTAs, when you're a non-EU citizen visiting the EU. And it says right here,
Yeah.
you can stay, let's see, extra period allowed in brackets for U.S. citizens staying in Europe longer than 90 days.
Yeah.
So you could visit these countries, 9 countries. You could essentially, prolong your stay by quite a bit. So.
And then it says you're not able to freely move around the Schengen area. So it's certainly interesting, something that most people are not thinking about.
Going into the topic that we wanted to discuss about, opportunities and ease of travel in Europe, I never really traveled extensively in Europe. I'd come visit my relatives in Germany. I went to, Amsterdam and a few different, major cities around Germany. But living in Germany, and with the kind of this new wave of low cost airlines, it's given rise to a lot of opportunities. Germany is a good hub. That's where I'm living now. You could go to several airports from Germany to smaller cities where all of these low cost airlines are pulling up routes like Wizz Air and Ryanair and EasyJet and things like that.
Right.
It's basically competing with train travel now. And so if you're traveling between countries in the EU, it can be very expensive. Hopping on a plane is much faster and cheaper. The only downside is getting to the airport, 2 hours ahead of time.
Right. I was in Europe this summer for a good portion of the time. And in the Balkans, it's really not easy to get around by train at all. I mean, there's basically no trains. You basically have to fly. And to be quite honest, even getting around by flights is not that easy because all of the cities in the Balkans are not major destinations. If you're flying from Vienna or Frankfurt or Munich or Paris or Amsterdam,
right,
of course you can get anywhere. But once you're in one of these places, there's a lot of times there are a few flights. So flying from Budapest to Sofia, Bulgaria. I mean, there's like 2 or 3 flights a week. So it's quite difficult sometimes to get between these places. And by train, it's not even worth considering. Wow. It's like 30 hours.
Well, I've noticed how if I want to go, so in the next, actually this week, we're going to fly down to Bilbao, Spain. Then we're going to rent a camper van and drive up through the coast of France and back through Paris and back to Cologne. But that's, that was a cheap flight. And then we're going to go to Thessaloniki, and I can drive down to another airport and fly out of there because it's cheaper versus flying through Frankfurt, Düsseldorf, or Cologne. I regularly, check flights from to Eastern Europe, to Belgrade, to Yerevan, Armenia, even Tashkent through Dubai. If you're traveling long term and you're flexible with your schedule, that's the main factor. If you're flexible with your schedule, then you have tons of options of getting around. Just within Europe, I'm probably other countries do this too, but just within Germany, I sometimes buy they have this new word ticket called the Deutschland ticket, and I pay 49 euros a month, and I can use it all regional trains. Maybe other countries have that as well. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to look at. But in any case, you have a lot of options. The only downside to maybe driving is the cost of fuel.
Yeah. No, but to be honest, the trains are so expensive unless you're taking these regional trains that stop everywhere. I remember when I, was in Frankfurt for a day and I met you, it was 75 euros to ride the train 35 minutes and back. With
the ICE, the fast train, which is super convenient. Honestly, it's awesome.
It's super nice, super convenient, but I mean, it's like $1 a minute to ride the train.
I didn't think about it that way.
It doesn't sound like a lot, but imagine if you're going from Frankfurt to Berlin, it's probably, 300 euros per turn.
It's pretty expensive. But if you mix and match, like even with my family, we've mixed and matched, driving to a nearby airport, hopping on a train. We took this one trip. It was funny. So we booked this camper van route from Stuttgart to Marseille. And I'm like, how the heck am I supposed to get me and the kids? I have 3 kids, so How are we
Right.
supposed to, get around? So we dropped off the camper van in Marseille. I found a flight on EasyJet to Basel, Switzerland. And then the train from Basel to Stuttgart, where my car was like, for all of us, it was about 105 euros. So I was like, that was, with some research and some flexibility, you can really drive down the cost of travel. That would be ideal for, single people or maybe married couples without kids, but you can still do it with kids as well.
Yeah, I know that's definitely true. Definitely true. I think when you live in Europe, it becomes much easier to think about and research all the options. Whereas, if you're just going on a trip or even an extended trip, you're probably not aware of.
I researched all that stuff in English, so.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that it's not available. I'm just saying people just doesn't come across their mind. That German energy there keeps going out.
Well, I've really enjoyed traveling, around Europe, and I think that it's underestimated, especially with maybe it's a lack of kind of knowing. Even in Italy, I took a train. I think I booked everything like just at the train station, or maybe even Google, and I'm somewhat more adventurous, so I didn't know for a fact that it would be on time or whatever, but I went on a 35-minute train ride from, where was it, Milan to Como or something, or it wasn't quite Milan, but it was about 30 minutes and it was 3.5 euros. And I was like, that's way cheaper than Germany. So, I mean, you kind of have to be adventurous and expect delays, and maybe you'll miss something, but it's quite fun for me to, I don't mind it that much. If I'm going to miss a train, I can, get on the next one, but some people are just, they have anxiety attacks or something about that, like my mom.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily that. I think if you're an American, you're always trying to make it as packed of a trip as possible, and people don't like dealing with that. I know we're more or less talking about extended trips, but if somebody's on a few week trip, then they're trying probably to pack as much as possible in, which, I've long given up on trying to do that. It's much better to have a relaxing trip, and, enjoying than being, racing here, there, and everywhere else, trying to see everything. But I think Europe is by far the most fun and interesting place to travel around. And it's so, compared to the US, where the only option you have is to drive or fly if it's a, really long distance. And the flights are not cheap in the US generally.
The draw to travel Europe is that the countries are even smaller than some of the US states, right? And so I drive 3 hours to Strasbourg. I'm in France, and they barely, I think, okay, you're near the border. Maybe you know German. Nope. They don't know English. They don't know German. They're just speaking French. Word, and like, right. I like that kind of experience, but the cultures are so close together. You can travel by car, by train, I take BlaBlaCar. That's one I forgot to mention. BlaBlaCar is like this car sharing, not car sharing, but ride sharing. Like if you'll put in your destination, so let's say Paris to Cologne, and you put in the date, and if you're traveling maybe 1 or 2 people, then you can usually find somebody to take you for, and you pay only for pretty much the gas, what the gas would be for that trip. And so somebody driving from Paris to Cologne might be doing it for work or whatever it is, and they could take you along for, I don't know. I went from Cologne to Berlin for 50 euros, and the train was 200, and the plane was 150. So you definitely, and you're not driving. Right. I mean, I sit there and you could talk to the drivers, or you kind of relax as, doing some work. And so between trains, cars, BlaBlaCar, or buses, you could certainly economically travel around Europe.
Agreed.
So check out bilateral agreements based on your passport, what countries you can visit visa free. And, if you're looking for trips to Europe, you can mix and match different modes of transportation. And it's fairly, it might be daunting at first, but once you start researching online, you'll see a lot of options. And you can mix and match and get around to a lot of cool places. So, and in the next episode, we'll talk about debit cards and credit cards. So that would be an additional episode you'll not want to miss if you're going for a long-term trip to Europe or outside the US or outside your home country. So,
right.
See you next time.
See you next time. This was the Expat Edge with Matt and Marcus. We hope you enjoyed the video. Visit theexpatedge.com for even more content that will help you thrive abroad. You can submit your ideas for video topics and sign up for free at theexpatedge.com. See you there.